If you happen to own a nuclear power station, please do not put Jack Lemmon in charge. You love the guy, but you just know that things are going to go wrong. The China Syndrome, a movie that has basically nothing to do with the country of China, has a really great opening scene. It starts with a reporter preparing for a live broadcast. Kimberly Wells is the character, and Jane Fonda is the actor. It's a role that suits her really well. In fact, if Jane Fonda hadn't become an actor, you could see her doing this, being this reporter. Anyway, the movie starts looking through a broadcast camera at Kimberly, who is anxiously waiting to go live. And we can hear her through her microphone, but you can also hear the guys back at the studio talking to each other in the booth, joking around, commenting on Kimberly and her news segment. This opening does a few different things. First of all, it's cool. It gives you this perspective behind the scenes. It feels kind of fresh, slick opening. You get a look at what goes into making this television program. And you also set up a particular relationship between this news product and the perspective of the film itself. Different types of vision. It's going to be something we'll come back to, maybe. Perhaps more importantly, this opening introduces you to some of the pressures that are going to define the movie. The pressure of the live broadcast. The danger of the live broadcast. What's going to happen? The pressure of a career. You can tell that Kimberly really wants things to go smoothly. She's ambitious. She wants more. There's also the pressure of being a woman in the workforce. When Kimberly goes live, it turns out that the hard-hitting story she's presenting is about a singing telegram company. This is a nice piece of irony, given that most people probably suspect that this movie is going to feature more serious news than singing telegrams. This story is probably hinting at some of the currents that Kimberly has to navigate in her workplace. She's pigeonholed as a human affairs anchor. Maybe not entirely respected by the people at the station. She feels like somewhat of an outsider and isn't satisfied by this. The China Syndrome is a movie about a nuclear accident. It came out 12 days before the 3 Mile Island incident. I'm pretty sure that is a coincidence, but you never know. The film perhaps benefited from those events. This film was directed by James Bridges. He directed The Paper Chase and some other things I haven't heard of. It was produced by Michael Douglas. Despite his pedigree, Douglas's acting career didn't really take off until the 1980s when he was in his 40s. But he did produce some big movies, including One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which he won an Academy Award for. Michael Douglas won 2 Academy Awards, Kirk Douglas 0. Anyway, Michael Douglas also acts in this movie, but to me, he is the weak link. Jack Lemmon is here, like I said, and he is fantastic. Character Mustache, Wilford Brimley, has a notable appearance as Ted Spindler, a pivotal employee at the power plant. I think he is the safety inspector for Sector 7G. This is a great character that a lot of the story hinges on. If you look at some reviews from 1979, you'll find people talking about the China Syndrome as a thriller. Watching it today, I'm not sure how thrilled you're going to be. To me, the movie stood out for different reasons, mainly for being pretty nuanced. You might expect this movie to moralize about the peril of nuclear power, and it does this to some extent, but mainly I think it focuses on some more interesting stuff, like dilemmas of journalistic integrity or the ways that the people working at the power plant think about nuclear power themselves, the way they think about risk. Of course, the main takeaway is, if you ever see Jack Lemmon running the nuclear power station, you should probably get in your car and drive in the direction as fast as you can. Let me give you a couple examples of where this film is unexpectedly nuanced. Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas at one point come into possession of some footage that they think is incriminating, and they want to broadcast it. But the executives at the station don't want to, because they don't know the source, they don't know what's really happening in the footage, and there are liability issues. Normally, when the young guns, the young Turks, go up against the suits in this sort of movie, it's the suits who are wrong, conservative, corrupt. But here, what they say is actually pretty sound. Think about a movie like Network, for instance. Here, what the executives say actually makes sense. And you start to get the feeling that the protagonists of this film might be a little bit naive. This movie is pretty well balanced, although as we get towards the end, things slip a little bit. And there are a couple of slightly outlandish events. Overall, however, I really like how many facets there are to this film. Just how many different things people are going to consider about their careers, safety, risk, sensationalism, the media, all this stuff. I think some of this journalistic integrity stuff might resonate with today's audiences. This news channel, it's called KXLA, clearly cares about its ratings. That's one of the reasons that they have Kimberly around. They also, they want some level of sensation with their news, but they do also have an eye on credibility. And some of these dilemmas of sensationalism that they face sound maybe like things that people grapple with today on social media. I think this angle of the film, this idea of sensationalism and sort of sensational media, might actually resonate with today's audiences more than some of the nuclear stuff does. I don't know. I'm a little bit out of touch from nuclear politics, but it resonated a little bit more with me, at least. There are also a lot of smaller details in this movie that show an uncommon level of care. For instance, we have one scene where Kimberly goes back to her apartment, and there she hangs out with her pet turtle. She has a lamp that is shaped like a duck, a light-up duck. I want one of those. This stuff doesn't matter too much, but it's nice to see a spark of creativity. Like, man, somebody making this movie was inspired. The last thing I want to talk about is the control room. There are a lot of movies that feature control rooms. This one actually has 2 control rooms. There's the control room at the nuclear plant, and there's the control room at the television station. Interesting. I think I talked about control rooms in my video about the taking of Pelham 123, where they've got a control room controlling all of the trains at the MTA. You wonder why these control rooms are so common in films, possibly because they're common in real life. I don't know. Have you ever been inside one? Possibly because they are a good narrative mechanic, a way to summarize all the action that is unfolding, bring it into one place, show you what's going on. Control rooms maybe hint towards the interconnectedness of the modern world. It's a centralized thing, though, so there's also an element of power here. It is called the control room, after all. This is really spelled out in the control room at the plant in this movie, which has all kinds of security. It's supposed to be impenetrable, and it ends up being sort of a dramatic nexus of the film. Who is in charge? Who is in the control room? The television control room is also a center of power in many ways. It's shaping the narrative of the broadcast. Kimberly in the beginning says, give me a little bit more time. And they say, nah. Interestingly, both of these places deal with risk in some ways. There's risk in nuclear power, allegedly. And on television, there is risk when you're doing a live broadcast. I've thought about making some of these videos live. Who knows? Maybe one of these days I will. But it actually takes me on average 600 takes to record one of these. Anyway, I don't want to sound too conspiratorial here, but this is an interesting parallel, these 2 control rooms. Both of these control rooms also come with their own sort of vision. The TV control room has all these cameras attached to it. That one's sort of obvious. When they do remote broadcasts, they call it a mini-cam broadcast. It's interesting that they name the technology for the viewers as if they have to explain how it's possible that a broadcast could occur from outside the studio. Don't worry, it's the mini-cam. No need to do that today. People understand remote broadcasts, I guess. Anyway, the TV control room is mainly looking outwards. The nuclear control room also has some cameras. They can look at the plant, but it's defined more by a huge window that executives can use to look down into this control room. It's more of a fishbowl. It's more inward looking. It's a window that reporters can look through into the control room. This movie has a few different layers of vision to it, looking out of the TV station, looking into the control room, and it culminates with having to hook them all together, which is kind of interesting. I don't think there's a super rigorous plot line here. I don't think there's anything too deep necessarily, but nuclear technology was, in some ways, the hallmark of the modern era or something like that, or the post-modern era even, potentially. And seeing how that is tied in with these different networks of power and information, these different ways of seeing that are technologically guided, is kind of interesting. Overall, The China Syndrome is a pretty cool movie. I will admit that I have since watched another Jane Fonda movie, which is 10 million times better, and I will be reviewing that shortly, but I like this movie too. I think it maybe doesn't have the same moral force that today that it once did. It might not have the same anxiety surrounding it, I'm not sure, but it's a surprisingly complex movie. There's a couple of things I didn't like as much. I didn't like Michael Douglas in the movie. His character has a sort of entitlement that works with the plot and helps balance the movie. Like I was saying earlier, you realize that these kids maybe don't know what they're talking about exactly, in the beginning of the movie, at least. But you also maybe feel that these parts where Michael Douglas is acting like he's really entitled maybe aren't acting at all. There is some fake time pressure in this movie, too. There's a hearing about nuclear power that one of the characters is racing to get to, and it seems like there's this huge deadline that he has to get to. But you wonder, well, hearings, government hearings, do these things ever move very quickly? No, of course not. And in the movie, they actually end up rescheduling some of the stuff to the next day. So some fake time pressure. The whole mechanic here is unclear with what this hearing is going to do anyway. The film also tries a little bit to explain nuclear power technically. They have a whiteboard session in the film, even, which is sort of couched within a television broadcast. Kimberly wants one of the plant employees to explain nuclear power and how the plant works for the television broadcast. It's almost an elegant narrative device to put this to slide this exposition in without anybody noticing, but it doesn't quite come off. You don't quite understand, at least I didn't quite get the whole picture of how the plant worked. And when we're in the control room later and the lights start turning red and the alarm starts sounding, minor spoiler, it's hard to understand exactly what is going on at that point. This might be by design. It's a technology we can't totally wrap our heads around, but it could doom us all. It might be by design, but it makes some parts of the film a little bit vague. Anyway, The China Syndrome is a little bit of an underdog movie, and there's a few places where it isn't totally rigorous, a few places where it's a little lightweight, but mainly I think this is a real gem of a film. But like I said, stay tuned for the next Jane Fonda movie I'll be covering because it is incredible.